told you that this is a unique feature of the religious Zionist world, where Shabbat Zachor is a big deal, almost like Purim. Okay, the Haggadah. We are back getting ready for Pesach. You can take a look afterwards. I have the facsimile edition of the Prague Haggadah, which I mentioned yesterday. It's not what our actual Czech student was talking about. This is way back from the 1600s, 1527 actually. It was originally published, one of the first Jewish books published, printed in the printing press. Very cool. Sorry, this is only in Hebrew. Yeah, there's no translation, but you can take a look at this, peruse this afterwards.
You finished chapter 15?
I think we're in the middle of chapter 15. We just
197.
Yeah, 197. Yeah. Yeah, we talked about the essence of the mitzvah, and we're going to talk about questions and answers. Okay, page 197, section 3. Yossi is here bright and early. Still half asleep, but Michal's here bright and early. Baruch Hashem. Good. Could you read for us, Michal? Page 197?
197.
Beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
From point 3.
Yes, correct. Excellent.
3. The mitzvah to begin the Seder with a question. There is a mitzvah to tell the story of the Exodus by way of question and answer, as it is stated. When in the future your child asks you, say to your child, "We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt." In Devarim 6, verse 20 to 22. It's likewise stated, when your children ask you, "What is this surplus to you?" say it is a Passover sacrifice to God. And when in the future your child asks, "What is this?" say to him, "With a mighty hand God took us out of Egypt."
Hang on a second. Have you ever heard of the 4 sons?
Yes.
Right, in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, the 4 sons. It comes up later that he's going to discuss it. The truth is, we find in the Torah 3 different places where the children ask questions. 3 different places, as he just quoted, 3 different psukim where when your children ask, or if your child asks. There are 3 places. So where do we get the 4th child?
The one who doesn't even know how.
The one who doesn't know how to ask, exactly. So we're going to see there's lots of 4s actually in the Haggadah Shel Pesach. We have to talk about what that means, but there's many things which are 4. 4 questions. What else is there?
4 cups.
4 cups of wine. Anything else?
The hidden matzah.
Right, but that's not 4. There's only 1. Looking for things that are 4.
4 concepts like we are saved, rescued.
Good. The 4 languages of redemption, which are in Shemot chapter 6. Very good. Yeah.
4 courses.
4 courses in the meal. I don't know how to count that exactly. Anyways, we the Torah seems to stress a number of times when the child asks, you respond, and from here we understand that how important it is, central to this mitzvah of telling the story, that it has to be in the form of questions and answers. Go ahead, Michael. Questions open the heart and mind.
Questions open the heart and mind to accept answers. The message we need to convey on the Seder night is so important and fundamental that we are commanded to do it in the most effective way, by way of question and answer. This is the main reason for the unique mitzvah of the Seder night, eating matzah, the Paschal sacrifice, and maror. They cause the children to ask, "Manishtana?" Why is this night different? And helps them understand that this is a special night whose essence must be understood. As a result, the sages instituted several unusual practices in order to inspire children to wonder and inquire further. We begin by giving the children nuts and roasted grain, through which they realize that this is a special festive night.
You ever seen that before?
No,
Giving the children nuts?
That never.
Never. Today, this is the ancient custom. Today, what do I distribute to the kids to keep everybody's interest? I have this. It's become a family minhag. Chocolate chips. Whoever asks a question now, in some families, the Seder becomes it can become a lecture, because you have to tell the story. So you can be a lecturer at the, and everybody has to be silent and listen. As we say here, there has to be class participation. There has to be questions and answers. There has to be back and forth. And so, but the kids prepare. What are we doing now? We're preparing for Pesach. The kids also in the Jewish day schools, they're learning about the Seder Pesach, and all the teachers want to impress the parents, and so they teach them lots of Torah, that they should, when you get to this point of the Seder, tell your parents that this is what this passage means, and it'll show off how much knowledge you learned in school, and it becomes a little bit like a contest of who says more divrei Torah amongst the little kids, and everybody's wanting to say something. I decided that we're missing the point. What do we want the kids to be doing?
Asking questions.
That's right. It's asking the questions, not giving the answers. It's my job to give the answers. Let them ask the questions. And so we developed this thing that whoever asks a question gets a chocolate chip. Yeah, chocolate chip's cute. It's little. It's not too big, and it's always fun to get a little piece of chocolate. And so, everybody gets excited by it. I have the grandmothers saying, "Wait, can I ask a question?" Well, he gets a chocolate chip. That already is a question, right? And everybody's competing for who can ask more questions. Moshe, no chocolate chips right now, but yeah, you can ask your question. But
What did you just say?
that's it. If it could go ad absurdum. But the point is to make an emphasis on the kids should be involved, should be interested, and that's what the sages wanted when they said, do strange things, keep them involved. And we're going to see there's a number of things that are strange. Keep reading Michael on page 198.
Yes, from the notes.
Right. The sages instituted washing hands.
The sages instituted washing hands and eating karpas dipped in a liquid after kiddush, something we never do throughout the year. Furthermore, instead of starting the meal at this point, pour the second cup of wine and remove the Seder plate and the matzot from the table, all to cause the children to realize that this is a very special night. They will thus truly be interested in its meaning, and they will sincerely ask, why is this night different? It can be said that this question, Manishtana, embodies a bigger and deeper question about the Jewish people. Why are we different from other nations? In our faith, in our mitzvot, in our suffering, in our spiritual achievements, in our exile and our redemption? There is no complete answer to this question. Only by contemplating the exodus from Egypt and the election of Israel can you understand that this is a divine matter. We are capable of understanding part of it, but we will never understand it all. This same question spurs us on toward infinitely deeper and more sublime understanding. Perhaps this is why the Torah instructs us to tell the story of the Exodus and of Israel's singularity using questions and answers. The ideological basis of Jewish peoplehood lies in a question that opens us to an endless profusion of ideas. If we do not impart the Torah and the story of the Exodus to the children, no new questions will be asked, and we will be unable to continue rising higher.
It's a funny joke. They say, how does a Jew answer a question? Right, you've heard this before, with another question. There's a big emphasis on questions. As a matter of fact, I had a Gioret sit at my table before she was Jewish, from the Congo, believe it or not. Yeah, this is the darkest parts of Africa, as they say. And somehow she made her way towards Judaism, Baruch Hashem, she's a Jewess now, and she's married to a former student of ours. That's how she got to my table. And I asked her, how did you get interested in Judaism? She was a friend brought her at some point to, she was searching and brought her to a Jewish, I think it was a Chabad house or something. And because she had lots of questions, and the priests and the different churches she was going to didn't have good answers, and they didn't really like that she was asking. And she came to the Chabad house, and they were sitting around the table, whatever it is, and she got up the nerve and she asked the question, I don't understand why X, Y, Z, and they all started to clap. They all started to clap. They applauded her and said, "What a great question! It's such a good question!" And she was blown away after being, pushed away from the other, responses because, you're not supposed to ask questions in other religions. In Judaism, it's the biggest thing. The best thing you can do is to ask questions. And she said, "Wow, this is something for me." And she obviously had a lot of questions, but she must have got some answers because she did progress. And we try, of course, we give answers. The night is the point of asking the questions to get the answers. But don't ever think, which is more important, the question or the answer. It's the question, because we're searching. Ultimately, the answer is infinite. The answer is God. The answer is try to understand the relationship between God and the world, God and the Jewish people. And that's something that you can never really put your finger on 100%. You're never going to figure it out. It's something divine. And but that's the way we progress and get to deeper and deeper answers, more and more answers by continuing to ask questions. You ask questions, you get an answer, great, you let it sit for a bit, and then you ask the next question. Every answer is the basis for the next question. And this is central to Judaism all year round, but especially it's learned and practiced on this night, the night of the Seder. Okay, so the questions is central, so much so that the rabbis didn't want to make you lose it just by accident, and they actually put it in the text, specific questions. Now it's true, some people say, and it says it even in the Gemara, once upon a time there was a story in the Gemara where two Amoraim were sitting there at the Pesach Seder, and I think they took away the table or something like that, or they did some kind of practice which was unusual. And one of the rabbis asked, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Okay, we don't have to say Manishtana anymore. We don't have to read the official questions in the text. Once you've asked in a natural way what's going on here, piques your curiosity, that's the point." But of course, we do read the Manishtana, and that's the first thing we teach the kids. And the questions that were actually set down in the text are very significant, and we're gonna study them. But that's a little bit about questions. Any questions? I hope not, because it means I was unclear. That's it. No chocolate chips. Yes.
Last over Hanukkah, there was a viral photograph online of a pillow being sold by the American retailer Bed Bath & Beyond, a throw pillow.
Okay.
It says on it, "Why is this night different from all other nights? Happy Hanukkah."
Oh, funny. Wow. They say that
It reminded me of that.
They say that there was a Jewish lord, a Jewish an Englishman who was very influential in England, and they decided to give him an honor. In England, the way it goes, there's a monarchy and the queen, and so they decided to give him a knighthood. And so the process is you go in front of whoever gets knighted goes in front of the queen, and he has to kneel and bow. And of course, there's a cross there. And this is an Orthodox Jew, so I can't do that. Not going to do that. So he figures out he doesn't know what to do, and he's nervous. He's so nervous. He prepares what he's going to say to excuse himself, that he can't kneel and that he can't bow down to the cross and everything, and he's he just is so nervous. So they're waiting in turn. Each one goes up and they kneel, and the queen puts the sword on him and does the cross thing, and it comes to his turn, and he comes up, and he's like so overwhelmed and so nervous. He just blurts out whatever he comes out from his insides. And from childhood, the first thing he was taught was Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. It just comes out of his mouth. And the queen goes to all of her entourage, why is this night different from all the other nights? But the truth is, I had the privilege of teaching a group of Jews that descendant from the Kaifeng Jewish community in China. It's a well-known historical fact that there was a Jewish community in China for hundreds of years, and it sort of fell apart in the last 200 years, but there's a few descendants that were brought over to Israel. It's a trickle, but that's what's left, and we're doing what we can. So anyways, these Chinese students, they were about your age, and I didn't know Chinese, and they didn't know English or Hebrew. So we had quite interesting classes. Eventually, there was some people knew a little more, and they learned more English, they learned more Hebrew, and we were able to teach them. But one of the hardest things that I had to do was to overcome the cultural barrier, because in China, to be a good student, you don't ask questions. You don't ask questions, and I'm expecting, I give a class, total silence. I don't know what they're thinking. Did they understand? Did they not understand? So I had to train them to ask questions. I would give them an exercise. Okay, this is your homework. Take this passage from the Torah, or this Sidur, whatever it was we were learning, and you have to come up with 3 questions about it. They couldn't do it. It was really hard. One of them got 1 question, but it's a way of thinking which we take for granted. In the Western world, scientific inquiry, you're always doubting things, but not in communist upbringing. And so had to really open up the box, as they say. And we got through, Baruch Hashem. 3 of them are married to Jewish women now, amazing. And 1 just had a baby a month ago. I think I told you about it. I missed the brit, but anyways, they learned how to ask questions. But that's a very Jewish thing, to know how to ask questions. Okay? Let's proceed. Page 199. Yossi, are you awake enough with us today? Go for it. Read from the top of the page, please.
Text of Menachem. In order to give this seminal question a structured framework, the sages formulated the Menachem text, through which the children express their surprise at how different this night is, paving the way for the telling of the Exodus story. The text contains questions about all the Seder night mitzvot related to eating, matzah, mara, the Paschal sacrifice, and the 2 dippings. After the destruction of the temple, we no longer ask about this Paschal sacrifice, and instead ask about reclining at the Seder. Right.
So originally, you realized that the text underwent changes. It's so old that it's from before, during temple times. This original text, we all recite it. Every Jew knows perhaps this text off by heart. Can you imagine any other culture where you have a text that's 2,000 years old, over 2,000, 3,000 probably years old, that, every child knows off by heart? It's unbelievable. So, of course, we had to make some adjustments. We can't have the child ask about the Paschal sacrifice when there's no Paschal sacrifice. So we take that out and we put in something else. But essentially, question is, what do you ask about? What's the classic Jewish question of this Seder night? It starts to get long, and, this uncle wants to say, when do we eat? Exactly. There's actually a movie called When Do We Eat? It's about the Pesach Seder. A little bit lo tzanua, a little bit immodest, but it's a very funny movie.
I saw a stand-up comedy routine on YouTube.
About
it was an Italian guy saying he was invited to a Seder.
That could be funny.
And he was saying, people hype up this night. I'm so excited. I bet the food's gonna be great. He shows up, and he's he says, what is this? Crackers? We're having crackers.
That's it. Crackers.
And he says, okay, so when do we eat? 2 hours.
Right.
I think he could say it better.
It's a whole stand-up scene, right? Well, it could be long, right? That's the first thing, really, that we. That's when we recite the Manishtana in the Seder. We're going to go through the book and we're going to see exactly. But right after the Kiddush, you're expecting to eat. And what do? We take away the Seder plate, meaning that's the food. We take away the food. And, the kid says, wait a minute, it's the meal. Where's the food? When do we eat? That's essentially, and then he recites the 4 questions, which are the official questions. But they're originally all about food, which makes sense, And they tell this story. It's a great story about 2 poor beggars, Jewish beggars. Well, the truth is, only one of them is Jewish, and they were the other one was a non-Jew. This is a story from Europe, and what do they say? I think it's the collegial feelings of the downtrodden are all, they feel for each other. And okay, every day they get a little bit of tzedakah. They put their hat out and their hand, and they get a few kopecks or whatever it is, the currency of the time. And the Jew tells his non-Jewish friend, today we get a little bit, tomorrow we get a little bit. You just wait though. When it comes to Pesach, we are going to eat like kings, because everybody knows that nobody can be alone on the night of the Seder, and we're going to get invited to eat, and it's going to be a lavish feast, and it's really, our bellies will finally be filled. And the non-Jew says, I'm not Jewish. What do you mean? They're not going to, it's okay. Just put on a kippah, come with me, we'll stand outside the synagogue, and they won't know the difference, and, we'll get invited to a Seder. What's the problem? So, all right, if you say, okay, so he puts on the kippah, and the night of the Seder comes, they're all waiting expectantly, and sure enough, after shul, the Jews come out of Seder in their finest, and they're all going to their homes, and they know it's such a big mitzvah to have the poor people, and they each get invited to a Jew's home for the night of the Seder. So the Seder passes, and they go back to their little shack where they hang out at night. The sort of homeless, but they have some place. And first the non-Jewish beggar comes, and he's waiting around, and finally his Jewish friend comes, and he starts to beat him. The non-Jew starts to yell at him and scream at him, "You lied to me! What, you setting me up? What?" He says, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about. What happened?" He says, "What do you mean, what happened? I'll go over to this house. Looks very fancy. All the best, finest fineries on the table, and then glass of wine. This is good. I have the first glass of wine. It's good. Very good. Okay, there's pillows. People are leaning. It's a little strange." And then, they start to serve the food. They serve some celery, and I dip it celery in salt water. That wasn't very tasty. Okay, but then they start to pray, and they start to sing songs, and the kids start to ask questions, and the kids, put on plays, and I'm like starving. I've been waiting for this for, weeks, and now all I have is this little bit of celery, and I see there's some crackers on the table. Okay, but I try to take the crackers. I say, no, not yet. Not yet. You can't even have the crackers yet. Finally, we get up to the. They finished all their songs. We get up to the meal, and they give me a cracker. Okay, I take the cracker. That's fine. I'm so hungry. I eat a whole cracker. And then, but I still don't see all the nice food that you promised me. And then they come and they say, okay, this is the next course. And they give me this horseradish. I'm so hungry. I just, I stuff it in. I almost died. I was like, it's so sharp that I said, these people are crazy. They're giving me crackers and burning, but they're trying to kill me. So I ran home, and I said, when you get home, I'm gonna kill you. And that's it. He left after the morrow. He says, the Jewish friend says to him, I see the difference. That to be Jewish, you have to know how to wait. You have to wait after the bitterness comes. Only after the bitterness comes the good stuff. And the good stuff is yet to come. And so you have to recognize that there's a process here. And this is a good story. The two beggars can't have a goyish cup to leave right after the bitterness. It's always darkest before the light. Anyways, let's go back to the Manishana text. Page 199. Yossi.
If there are no children present to ask Manishtana, the youngest participant asks. Even if all the participants are Torah scholars well versed in the story of the Exodus, one of them must ask Manishtana. Even an individual performing the Seder alone must begin with Manishtana. This is how the Seder is arranged. We begin with a question because it makes the explanation more complete. Once a child or someone else has asked Manishtana, the other participants need not repeat the question and may proceed immediately to Avadim Hayinu.
Okay. So 1 second. So the really, what's the answer? There's these 4 questions. When do we get to the answer? So we're going to see that there's actually 2 answers given. This goes back to the Talmud. In the Talmud, there was a discussion between Rav and Shmuel. What's the proper text of the Haggadah? What do we do today? We follow these. We follow both. We follow both, right? So we have the question, right, or 4 questions, right? And then we're going to have to look in the Haggadah afterwards for the answers. So we have actually 2 answers. Answer number 1 starts off with the words Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves to Paro in Egypt. We'll see the text in a few minutes. Avadim Hayinu Paro Mitzrayim, and God took us out of Egypt. Pretty simple. That's a very short answer. We embellish it a little bit, and we add about the plagues and about the miracles and the splitting of the sea, and we talk about it. And we talk about the slavery. What the bottom line is Avadim Hayinu L'Paro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem took us out. That's the form that I believe is the form of Shmuel or Rav. I always get them mixed up. There's two of the Amoraim, 2 of the Talmudic scholars. Answer number 2, which we also recite as part of the Haggadah, starts with Mitechila. Mitechila, and that means in the beginning. And here, what is the beginning? Does anybody remember? Has anybody been to a Seder before where they actually understood what was going on after the cup of wine? In the beginning, our forefathers were pagans. Ovdei avodah zarah hayu avotenu. It goes all the way back to Terach, the father of Avraham, who came from an idolatrous world. And then God chose him and ultimately created, in the beginning, we stem from pagans. And now the end result is Hashem gave us His Torah. So we have essentially 2 stories to tell. The simplest way of explaining it is this is perhaps the physical, historical story of slavery, affliction, poverty, and suffering, which the end result, the redemption, is the physical redemption to well-being, to being independent, to having what we need, being taken care of by God in the desert. This is one story, but there's another whole way. You could just say it's another perspective, another lens through which we can view the story of the Exodus that we're trying to tell, and that's the spiritual story. the story of this is the Exodus from Egypt was the creation of the nation of Israel, which is significant because God chose us, and we believe in one God. And this is we start the story way back even before Egypt started. We go back to Haran and to even Ur Kasdim, where Avraham lived, and we ultimately the culmination is not just crossing the sea, but it's also coming to Sinai and receiving the Torah. So we have 4 questions, but 2 answers. The answer, and we're going to see perhaps that out of these 4 questions, they might all be how they relate back, how the answers in each story relates back to answering those 4 questions. That's the basic structure of the Haggadah, right here. You have it all. I mean, I have another class on it. Could spend hours analyzing the structure of the Haggadah, but the basic understanding is that, of course, we have Kiddush first, and we have the meal afterwards, but when it comes to the Magid section, the section where we actually tell the story, this is it. This is basically it. We have the questions and the answers. That's the way it's structured. Okay, and but because this mitzvah to tell the story is so central, we actually talk about it before we do it. Or part of doing it is to be aware. It's sort of like, something happens to books over time. It's a phenomenon in literature around the world that when you have, it's like a play. In a play you have stage instructions in between the lines, like it says now enter right, or this character exits left, or then they move on and the scenery changes to where it was, and there's all explanations about how to produce the play, about how to stage it. So we have stage instructions sort of built into the Haggadah. It's not so much a stage instruction, but it's a instruction how to tell the story. And really, like we said, there's 4 questions. You could just naturally ask the questions. No, it's in the Haggadah. The 4 questions are laid out for us. So too, we have laid out for us an educational program. If you ever wanted to study education, it's right here. You can. I'll give you a diploma after Pesach. You went through Education 101. The Torah gives you, the Haggadah gives us instructions how to be a good teacher. And the answer is how to be a good teacher is asking questions is good. It's a good start.
Having the answers.
Nope. Having the answers is less important, believe it or not.
How to answer
Having a
questions
plan.
with question.
Good. Good. That's a very Jewish answer, Moshe.
To be a teacher, you would have to have been a good student.
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes the worst students
Wait,
make
wait,
the best
wait.
teachers
Rob, I have
because
a-
they
I
know
have
all.
a better answer.
Oh, yeah.
But Rob, what do you think?
Oh, there we go.
Even more
The,
Jewish answer.
the answer is that there's no one answer.
Oh.
How many answers are there? Good. Amos. 4. By the way, Amos, before I forget, the Prague Haggadah is on the table. I brought it in. The one from 1527, I believe. That's the one I thought you were referring to. There's no check in there. But it is
It's a new Prague Haggadah.
the new Prague Haggadah. I see. There you go. That makes sense. That's more practical. The ancient one, it was famous because it was one of the first books printed in the world. One of the first, Weinberg, in the first printing press, I think published it there. But
All of this was properly pressed with ink.
And here's every single
Absolutely.
letter to be put into the plate. What's it called?
I think this might even before letters and plates. I think that each page was actually carved. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, let's get back to the answer. Is there's no one answer? Why? Because how many answers are there? And Amos says 4. Why are there 4 answers? Well, we just said the Torah actually guides us in this, and it has 3 different times where it describes the children asking questions. Sages came up and said there's 4 sons, and they each require a different answer. I mean, it's true we say there's 2 answers thematically, but how to give the answer? Really, there should be 4 answers. And we're going to see there's perhaps embellishments upon these, but let's talk about the 4 children. And the answer you give to one child is not the same that what the other one needs to hear. There's a famous commentary. I think it's by Samson Raphael Hirsch. You've heard of him?
Yes.
Rabbi Hirsch was the leader of German Orthodoxy, and he, I think he wants to say, and he speaks about Yaakov and Esav. Now, who was the parent of Yaakov and Esav? Who remembers? Who was the parents?
So, Jacob and Esau?
Yaakov and Esav. Who was their parents? Yitzchak and Rivka, right? Yitzchak and Rivka. Now, we all know what happened to Esav. Right? Esav did not really join the Jewish people. The continuation of the Avram and Yitzchak was with Yaakov. Esav went on a different path. And the question always is, well, did Yitzchak not teach him Torah? Did he not educate Esav? He did a good job on Yaakov. Did a very good job on Yaakov. Why would he not? It said, the Torah says explicitly that he loved Esav. Rivka loved Yaakov more. And so Yitzchak, why did he fail? Why did he fail as an educator, essentially? It's a very good question, right? Yitzchak had two children. With Yaakov, we say he succeeded. He became a scholar. He became he bore the torch of the Abrahamic tradition on to the next generation. He had 12 sons, which became the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Esav just sort of didn't make the cut. Why? So Rabbi Hirsch, he said, in his educational wisdom, he gave there's many interpretations. We don't really know the answer, but his answer was because Yitzchak sent Yaakov and Esav to the same yeshiva. Sent them both to the same school. He gave them the same education. He told them the same stories. He told them he taught them the same Torah. He gave them the same lessons on ethics. And what do we learn in the Haggadah Shel Pesach? Different kinds of children. Esav apparently needed a different type of pedagogy. He needed a different type of education. And you're not going to reach both kids if you assume that they're the same. They say if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right? You only have one method of teaching, so that's all you're going to do. But it's not appropriate if it's a screw. It's a screw. You need a screwdriver. So this is a fundamental educational principle which the Torah teaches us through the four children at the Haggadah of Pesach. All right, let's go ahead. Maybe I'll grab Moshe's attention here for you. Read for us on page 200, please.
The Torah speaks of four children?
Yeah.
The Torah speaks of four children. On 4 occasions, the Torah states that one must tell his child about the Exodus from Egypt, and each time it uses a different formulation. This teaches us that one must tailor his storytelling to the ability and personality of each child. In one place it states, when in the future your child asks you, what are these testimonies, laws, and principles that the Lord our God commanded you? The fact that he asks in a detailed manner, what are these testimonies, laws, and principles, implies that we are dealing with a wise child, and the verse that follow teach us that the answer we give must be detailed. We must clarify at length the whole matter of the Exodus from Egypt, the mitzvahs of Pesach, and the destiny of the Jewish people. Therefore, the answer for the wise child is the longest and most detailed, as shown in the next section. Elsewhere it states, when you ask...
Go ahead.
When your children ask you, what is this service to you? Say, it is a paschal sacrifice to God, who passed over Pesach, the house of the Israelites in Egypt, when he smote Egypt and spared our homes. Since the child calls the mitzvos service, avodah, which connotes work, and since he excludes himself from the mitzvos, saying, what is this service to you? It is clear that he does not feel like a participant in the mitzvos. Nevertheless, the Torah commands us to address him and explain to him Israel's uniqueness and expressed in the paschal sacrifice. It also states, when in the future your child asks, what is this? Say to him, with a mighty hand God took us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. When Pharaoh refused to free us, God killed every firstborn in Egypt, human and beast alike. The question, "What is this?" indicates that the asker is simple and does not know how to sharpen his question. The Torah commands us to explain to him, according to his abilities, the impressive events that took place during the exodus from Egypt, the mighty plagues that struck the Egyptians, and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, which was finally softened by the plague of the firstborn. These are the things the simple child absorbs and finds most impressive. Even if the child is not moved to ask at all, one must tell him about the Exodus, as it states, matzos are to be eaten. Tell your child on that day, it is because of this that God did for me when I left Egypt. Since he does not ask any questions, his interest must be aroused with tangible objects. Therefore say to him, it is because of this, by virtue of the matzos, maror, and paschal sacrifice, God performed miracles for us and took us out of Egypt. Thus, we put the Seder plate on the table so that each food on it can illustrate one of the ideas that find expression at the Seder.
As we said yesterday, there's show and tell going on in the Haggadah. We use all these props, the matzah, the maror, it's all there on the table, the wine, the cups of wine. It's a very experiential, and that's best for somebody who's simple-minded and, what do they say? It's the generation of screens that they used to watching and expecting little sound bites that they can't grasp. Oh, I watched way too much TV when I was a kid, but they're for me too. So for me too, so different kids need different types of education, different types of methods. It's very interesting. If you look in the notes, you'll see that the presentation that he presented of the 4 children. By the way, what are the 4 children? Right, Chacham, Rasha, Tam, and She'eino Yodea. Not dumb.
Tom is simple.
Simple, yeah. Lish'ol. Okay, Chacham is wise, Rasha is evil. Not exactly opposite. It's interesting. Tam is the simple child, and She'eino Yodea Lish'ol. Somebody is so simple that he doesn't even know how to ask. He doesn't even ask. There's a lot of talk. People speak about that there's actually a 5th son.
The one who didn't even
The one who didn't even make it to the table. The one who didn't even come. And we have to be aware to attract those Jews that are so estranged that they don't even come to the table. But the classic 4 are here. Yes, Moshe?
The way that Rasha was explained to me when I was in day school is that he's not necessarily evil, but rather rebellious. Because if he was truly evil, he wouldn't have shown up. So therefore, he's curious, but he's scared to express his curiosity in the right way.
Right.
So he shows up, but he shows up and he's angry.
Right. Sure. That's a beautiful explanation. I think that they say.
I realize it's a metaphor. It's not an actual table, right?
Right.
Yes.
Doesn't matter, but they say that.
And that's in the explanation. Was also a metaphor.
Someone who doesn't see a metaphor.
The point of the Torah mentioning the evil one isn't this guy didn't.
It's actually not called evil in the Torah, but in the Haggadah
it's saying there are Jews in life that are going
exactly
to deny.
Precise. But I think Moshe's point was, they tell the story about Shlomo Karbach who would go around, and he was a big Hasidic rabbi. Other than a singer, you might have heard of him as a singer. He's also a teacher of Torah and the Hasidic movement particularly, and there's a debate within the yeshiva world. The Hasidic movement was a little bit different. It was a little bit a different attitude than the Lithuanian yeshivot. And the standard was till then the standard, the more elitist and intellectual, as opposed to the emotional Hasidim. And so he would apparently, when he in his youth, before he charted his own path, as they say, founded his own shuls, he would go around to the different yeshivot in America that were like the Lithuanian traditional intellectual yeshivot, and he would try to teach Hasidut, try to teach the Hasidic movement's teachings. And he tells over that, he was, eventually started using his guitar, and that attracted a lot of people and the emotional side. But he said, I would look, when I got to a yeshiva, I would look for that guy that was like Ariel, I would look for that guy that had his feet up, like he was sitting in yeshiva and using as a footstool. He was using the Hasidic Sfarim as a footstool. Right? The worst mitnaged, they're called, the worst opponents. He says that's the guy I got to get, right? Because sometimes when you rebel, it expresses that you actually care. It expresses that you actually you're involved. Somehow touches on a nerve, right? If you're apathetic, it's very hard to reach you one way or the other. But if you have an antagonism, then that's a sign that you're ripe for, if you just address them properly, you're ripe for learning about, proper understanding of what Chassidut is. Maybe you could change that opposition to becoming a proponent, and he was quite successful, as I understand. Tov. So the 4 children. I was starting to say that if you look in the footnote number 3, he discusses a little bit this issue that the actual questions, as we said, there's 3 times where it says in the Torah, your children ask you questions, and then the Torah gives answers. In the Haggadah, we don't use those questions and answers. We sort of mention the questions, but then we give them other answers, the ones in the Torah. It's a fascinating thing to analyze why the author of the Haggadah, we don't know specifically who it was. It's very ancient, as we say, but we don't know specifically who. And there's different sections, of course. We have scholars have spent years trying to figure this out. But in general, that's not important for us right now. I refer you to...
Haggadah, the oldest one we know of?
Oh, not at all. That's the oldest printed in a printing press. We have Haggadahs from hundreds of years before that. Sure.
So you have hidden answers.
What I was saying was that there's another book here, Nechama Leibovitz. You might have heard of her. I merited to study with her in her home. Yes, in the bottom corner there of the room of the library, there's her. Right, it's some of her commentary on the Torah, and she goes through. They actually published posthumously. They published a Haggadah Shel Pesach of Nechama Leibovitz with her insights. And there, of course, this is a classic thing that she likes to do, analyze the differences, what the Torah's answer is, and why the Haggadah changed it, and what it means, and what the different emphasis is. So there's a lot to study here, but we're not going to do that right here. There is an interesting question here. It says at the bottom. Oh no, sorry. We'll go on to the next section. Okay, we'll leave that for your own further investigation. It's a fascinating discussion of exactly what the answers are. As I said, the 2 major answers are right here. We do quote the pasuk in the Torah when your child comes and says X, Y, Z, and then we do give him a brief answer, but it's more like an educational approach than a content answer. Like the Rasha comes, what do you do? Everybody knows? Blunt is haket shinav. Some people say, the word. It's a little bit of a Hebrew word game, but when you take the word Rasha and you take out the letter Shin, it can spell the word Re'ah. Re'ah means a friend, like the Dod and the Ra'aya and Shir Shirim. So some people give a nice explanation. It says, with the Rasha, the literal translation is you're supposed to break his teeth or blunt his teeth. In other words, sometimes somebody who's rebellious, you've got to fight back. You've got to, prove him wrong or whatever you take it to be a metaphor for. But this metaphor says, Hake et shinav. It doesn't mean his teeth. It means the shin. Take the shin out of the word, and he'll, instead of being an evildoer, Rasha, he'll become a Re'ah, he'll become a friend. So somehow, how do we deal with those evil sons? We befriend them. We befriend them, and that's an educational approach, which I prefer. The teeth thing, I'd probably break my knuckles, and it just seems too painful. So, but whatever it is,
Had a bet and he just becomes hungry.
that he is anyways. We're all hungry. But
Also the word Ra
It could,
bad.
yes, right. It could, but then you wouldn't have a nice Dvar Torah, would you? If you read it Reya, it means friend, and then it's the same letters. You're right, same letters, but there's another word that Reya, which means a friend. Ready? Yes, Russell.
What was it that came from to blunt his teeth?
So it's in the Haggadah.
It's in the Haggadah.
It's in the Haggadah. We're going to open up the Haggadah. We're going to look at them and see all this inside, as we say. We'll see it inside. But what Rav Melamed is giving us an overview of the Seder, giving you a little bit of overview of the structure, and we'll actually open up the books very soon. Number 6. David, please read.
The main message of the Haggadah. In order to understand fully the goal of the Haggadah and the story of the Exodus from Egypt, we must consider the question of the wise child and the answer he receives. For he is the preferred child, and we pray that all our children develop and succeed in becoming wise.
Of course, the joke is that the Zelensky, the hero of the Western world right now, he's a Jew. And he's even a proud Jew, believe it or not. Despite the fact that he's the leader of, somehow, miracles, he's the leader of Ukraine, which is like one of the most anti-Semitic countries in the world. But all right. Anyways, he is a Jew. Anyways, the joke that's going around is that they interviewed his mother. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Oh, aren't you proud? Your son is the hero, the prime minister. He's fighting against the..." Apparently she said, "My other son's the doctor," right? So the Jewish mother wants her son to be wise. This is a stereotype of all too true in many contexts. The Jews who were not allowed to be a member of the economy in hundreds of years in Europe, they were forbidden to join the Carpenters Guild and the Blacksmith Guild. They were just shunned, and they sort of were forced into commerce and all sorts of money lending, all sorts of things like that. This is historical facts. And so it's natural that coming out of hundreds of years of exile like that, when the world did open up, and the Jewish tradition of teaching our children to read and being very smart enabled us to survive. When the world did open up, the first thing is to not only get a Torah education and know how to read Aleph Beis, but also how to be an educated and have a career, and so to be a doctor was the Jewish. It still is in many people's conceptions. The highest that you can reach, it's a true fact about every immigrant society that they try to get ahead. They try to get through education and through becoming educated, you raise your social status from being the poor immigrants to becoming really part of society. And so, for sure, for the Jewish people that were always immigrants for hundreds of years throughout our wanderings, the idea of having our children develop and becoming wise. So clearly, he's at the top of the totem pole. The Chacham, the wise son, is, and of course, in the context of Torah, we all want we have to teach our children Torah. We spoke about it yesterday. There's a mitzvah all year round to teach your children Torah. They have the Talmid Chacham. Talmid Chacham is the pride of Jewish society and of Jewish families, and we all want to be ourselves Talmidei Chachamim and our children to be Talmidei Chachamim. That's the plural. Talmid Chacham actually means
Smart student.
Student, right? Chacham is wise, and student. It's actually debatable what it means. Is the student wise, or is the student of the wise? It can be read both ways.
Yeah, nice.
And it makes a difference. Nowadays, there's actually a lot of women that are getting higher education in Torah, and the question is, what do we call them? Talmidah Chachama. Is she a wise student herself, or is she Talmidat Chacham? She's a student of the wise. Chacham remains, the teacher remains a Chacham in masculine. And this fine little distinction to try to understand what exactly this phrase Talmid Chacham means. But even if you're a Chacham, what I take from it is that even if you're wise and you have reached a level of scholarship and knowledge, everybody in this room I consider them to be wise and to have the opportunity. And you've reached you've accomplished a certain level of Torah knowledge. You remain a Talmid. You remain a Talmid. Even if you're Chacham, the goal is not to be Chacham. The goal is to be Talmid Chacham. Talmid Chacham. You still, the wisest people are always constantly learning. Okay? So let's proceed. The wise child, go ahead, David, yeah.
The wise child poses a detailed question as it states, as it is stated. When in the future your child asks you, what are these testimonies, laws, and principles that the Lord our God commanded you? The answer initially addresses the exodus from Egypt, but then broadens to include the overall purpose of the Jewish people who come to Eretz Israel to adhere to God, to fulfill all of His mitzvot, and to earn His benevolence. Say to your child, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, but God took us out of Egypt.
By the way, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. We're quoting from this pasuk in Shemot, and he's quoting from the Haggadah. The Haggadah, what he's quoting from is we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem took us out. Go ahead.
God brought great and terrible miracles and demonstrations upon Egypt, Pharaoh and his entire household before our very, very eyes. He brought us out of there in order to bring us to and give us the land He promised to our forebears. God commanded us to keep all of these laws, to fear the Lord our God, for the sake of our everlasting benefit, so that He might sustain us as we are today. And it shall be considered our virtue to observe and perform all these commandments before the Lord our God, as He commanded us. We see then that the aim of the Seder is to impart to our children, by telling the story of the Exodus, the desire to belong to the people of Israel, to inherit the promised land, to adhere to God, and to perform all of His mitzvot.
I wish that everybody would understand this point, the main message of the Seder. Many people have a Seder, and estranged Jews, they know they're supposed to have a Seder, so they read. Sometimes the message doesn't become clear. Historical awareness is important. Every little bit of connection, identity is precious. But really what we're aiming for is that identity, that connection, is not just about we're part of a people that once this happened to them, but it's part of the larger story. Desire to belong to the people of Israel, to inherit the promised land, to adhere to God, to perform all His mitzvot. It's not just about we were slaves, He took us out. It's almost like geopolitical. This change.
You're also talking about the Mizraim inside of us right now.
Beautiful. He hasn't mentioned that yet, but that's more of a Hasidic twist, speaking about the spiritual or internal Egypt, that we might be in dark places and people are suffering of all sorts of different things, even within ourselves. But he was just saying the national narrative includes being in Egypt, coming out of Egypt, to become the Jewish people that are connected to God and His Torah. It's not just about Jewish nationalism disconnected from Torah. It's Jewish nationalism which has a goal to it. It has a promise. It has a vision, a destiny. And that's really what we're trying to impart in this answer. Okay, we were in Egypt, we came out, let's eat.
Let's party.
Let's party. We're free. We're free to be you and me. We're free to do anything we want. This is the classic distinction. Usually when you think about freedom in the Western world, you think about freedom from oppression, freedom from persecution, freedom from everything that shackles you. We speak about freedom to, not freedom from, but freedom to, freedom towards, to fulfill our holy mission, our being the chosen people of God, freedom to worship, to fulfill the mitzvot, freedom with a positive content, not just freedom from. You have to start with freedom from, but ultimately the goal is not just releasing the shackles. It's about guidance and direction towards freedom. You have to replace the bondage to the evil dictators and their way of life and their morals and values, you have to replace that with the Torah and the correct values and morals and so this is the main message, not just that God took us out. So it brings together the second story, which we're going to focus more on, the spiritual story of the paganism versus, believing in one God. Really, the answer composes both. There's two sides to the coin of going out. And the wise son of all the sons, he's the one that should, understand this better than any others. Okay, the simple man, the simple son, all he knows is, okay, you're in jail, and you get out. Do not go to jail. Do not collect $200. No, go to the rest. That's the opposite, right? And get out of jail. When you get the get out of jail card, you're happy because you get to walk around the boardwalk. The Monopoly game. You recognize the references, right? It's in all the cultures. I think in all countries they have Monopoly. Capitalism has conquered the Western world. It's a beautiful thing. But in any case, the point is that it's not just to be free from jail. It's freedom towards something, and the something is not buying Hollywood and collecting taxes on it, right? The point is not just to make a lot of money and be rich and sit on the beach and drink pina coladas, although that's nice for a vacation. But your goal in life is to serve God, inherit the promised land, perform His mitzvot, as we say. Okay, let's continue. David, go ahead.
To enable us to tell the story of the Exodus to the wise child without leaving out any of its essential components, the man of the great assembly who lived at the beginning of the Second Temple period composed the text of the Haggadah. Over time, the leading Tanaim, Amoraim, and Geonim added passages containing important elements related to the mitzvot of the Haggadah. Finally, about 800 years ago, a consensus version was accepted by all Jewish communities, based on the text of Rav Amram Gaon.
Who remembers? What are the Tanaim, Amoraim, and Geonim? And when did they live? Remember, if you have the charts, bring them out. If you know it off by heart, it's great. Second Temple period, when was this?
From 0 to...
Well, Second Temple period was from minus 586. That's when the destruction was. So
About minus 500.
516, 70 years, whatever, if you count it. So minus 500 to?
About 0 C.
Well, we know, right, approximately. We know 70. That's when the temple was destroyed. Second Temple era. Who were the leaders of the Jewish people? Nope. Nope. There were some of the end of the Second Temple.
The Romans.
Right, even before that, there's this group that's...
Sadducees.
Nope. Nope. It's right here in the paragraph. I guess you weren't reading, or you didn't recognize what you were reading. The men of the Great Assembly. Second Temple period starts with the men of the Great Assembly. Then we move on to the Zugot, and finally, and then around 0, we move to the leaders being called Tanaim, authors in the Mishnah and its accompanying books. Until what year? When did Rabbi Yehuda Anasi live? 200, correct. So that's the period of the Tanaim. Then starts the period of Amoraim. Until what year approximately? 500, 700, depends whether you're talking about in Israel or in Babylon. And then comes the period of the Geonim. It's right here in your chapter. And in the Gaonic times, there was one of the most famous of the Geonim, these rabbis at the period of approximately 900, year 900. Oh, it's only about, how many years back is this? 1,200 years behind us? Way back. This text became standardized pretty much based on the text of Rabbi Amram Gaon. This was one of the... My mother lives on a street called Rabbi Amram Gaon. It's not so far from here. We'll do a class trip one day. Whenever time I go to my mother's house, she gives me ice cream, so it's worthwhile.
Call her in advance.
I buy the ice cream, so I have to make sure that... So Rabbi Amram Gaon, in many ways, he was a leader. His Sidur, he's famous for his Sidur, where he pretty much set down the texts that were being said at the time, and they became standardized from then to all over the diaspora, wherever the Jewish people spread. Okay, so we have the text that develops over time, and there are even some additions afterwards, but finish it off on page 203 at the top.
The text of the Haggadah is thus a complete story, and whoever recites it covers all aspects of the Exodus from Egypt. Nonetheless, the more one explains the Haggadah and expands upon it with illuminating ideas, stories, and laws related to Pesach and the Exodus, the more commendable it is.
So if you say recite and you read the entire Haggadah, you're covered, you're safe. You've got all the major elements in there for sure. Yeah, that's what the texts are there. That's why they were written for. And I was saying you could, freestyle it a little bit if you want, as long as you understand what you're doing. Maybe don't try this at home, folks. It's for the experts. But you can always add, and that's usually the custom. So we read the text and we pause, have a discussion, kids ask questions, etc., and then we go back and continue the text. And you recite every word of the text. You're telling the story with all the elements necessary. Last question, Amos.
Is the reason why they put in the Haggadah so many pictures or so many different texts and different way around the text? That's the reason behind it.
I think to keep everybody interested and to embellish the mitzvah. It's always a good thing to have. When you do every mitzvah, you should do it beautifully. You should have a beautiful talit and a beautiful tefillin. Why not have a beautiful Haggadah from which you're going to tell the story? And of course, I have a Haggadah at home which has crossword puzzles and all sorts of games for the children, so that if they get bored, the adults are talking about this Paschal sacrifice or whatever it is that they don't understand what's flying. At least they'll have something to do. Or there's riddles and games sometimes. There's Haggadot which have those in there to keep the interest of everybody involved. Okay, we'll stop here for today. We'll continue with Hashem. I didn't even say something about the parsha. Shabbat Shalom. Next week we'll do it. We'll have to do it.